Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and today's video is very different. A lot of it is going to be rift as we fight a couple of monsters, but I wanted to look over a little theory that's been in the back of my mind for a while now after seeing both Vaal Hazak and Kushala Daora. To do this, however, we have to look back at a little overview of the ancient civilization. There are many other content creators that have covered the ancient civilization more than I intend to, so you can check them out. Guys like Strawfoot, Bife, Mylan, and Basil Silly 6-Shooter are ones that really do come to mind immediately. If you want to hear me summarize the ancient civilization, however, just let me know. I just feel like it's been talked about enough. The largest thing I wanted to focus on with knowledge that we have of the ancients is something called the Equal Dragon Weapon. This creature was seemingly created by the deaths of other monsters, forced to die by the experiments done by the ancients in what was called the Forbidden Act. This name was given as the act of killing to create this new life that went against the laws of nature. You see, to create one of these beasts meant that hundreds of dragons would have to lose their lives. Obviously, this goes very much against nature, and eventually the sentient dragon races decided enough was enough. Lost to the annals of history are a majority of records on the Equal Dragon Weapon, thanks to the Great Dragon War. But the guild has been able to recover a dead Equal Dragon Weapon within an old warehouse. The current goals of the guild in order to research this thing and figure out what it is that's going on with it kind of go a little further than the typical. It's to actually understand a little bit more of the ancients and why they might have ended up pulling an act like this. There are other theories I have on the Equal Dragon Weapon itself, but I wanted to simply outline that the ancients weren't quite as awesome as you might think. Monster Hunter is a post-apocalyptic world, or I guess it's more of a recovering age for humanity after terrible loss and strife. This means there's plenty of mysteries and ideas that can be brought to bear, and a gaggle of them are more visual than they are anything else. This leads me to today's theory. Vaal Hazak is a dead Kushala Daora. One of the most common elder dragons amongst the world of Monster Hunter, Kushala Daora parts were even used to create a hulking tower outside of the Great Forest. Obviously, this tower would not be built from just one Kushala Daora, and this only furthers the point of how much and how many of these carcasses the ancient civilization had for Kushala beforehand. It was a very test-heavy subject, and it doesn't make me like the ancient civilization at all. If you wanted any kind of grimdark at all, well, it's literally pretty grim, and it's very dark. But still, where do I get this feeling that Vaal Hazak and Kushala Daora are the same monster? Let's go down the checklist. First up, let's go over build of each of these monsters. Both are actually about the same size, and I find this to be kind of interesting only because, well, we generally don't see that too often. Yes, you're going to have the similar ideas and similar sizes with something like Rathian and Rathalos, as well as also Teostra and Lunastra, but this is seemingly a different race altogether, or at least so we're being led to believe. And this isn't something that's just restricted to how tall they are. We're also talking wingspans, we're talking jaw sizes, we're talking claws, as well as also overall body design. They're both very similar in how they overall look. And of course, this is easily needed to be noted because, well, why not? For Lord's sake, they look the exact same. Both, of course, also have very pointed snouts and very elongated tails. Both of them also sever at about the same points. And overall, the only major difference is that Vaal has that veil that kind of covers his face, as well as the rest of his body, including his wings, tattered as they may be. Additionally, the fangs of both Vaal Hazak and Kushala Daora look very similar. They're both extremely pointed. Of course, the only major difference is that Vaal has that extra jaw that overflaps everything, but I think that can kind of be explained away, though maybe pushes it. Though before I get there, scales also look very similar. The problem with Vaal, of course, is that you have to get away from that effluvian cover that he uses, but as soon as you're past it, you can actually see that Kushala and Vaal both have very similar looks when it comes down to their scales. This is something that I haven't seen in a lot of other monsters, again, unless they are expressively the same exact monster, and that is something that, again, I feel is important. There's spikes that are otherwise on Vaal Hazak as well, which Kushala does not display. There's one very major thing to keep in mind with Kushala, however, and that is that he has a very tough hide. We don't necessarily see his bones or anything else underneath, so we're not sure necessarily how strong or what might be underneath those scales. And it is something at least to kind of keep in mind and consider. And perhaps what I should add to that thought is just keeping in mind what I said at the top of the show, talking about the Equal Dragon weapon. We're not necessarily sure what other kinds of experiments or anything like that the ancient civilization had done. This is just one of the first things that really does kind of strike to me that there is a reason to consider these monsters as being one and the same. Additionally, the bones and the spikes that you do see all over Vaal Hazak may not even be native to the monster. They could be something that have kind of ingrown or kind of linked themselves to Vaal Hazak's skin and scales, all because of experiments that may have been done by the ancient civilization. This is just stuff that as our common term in our Destiny creativity would be, spinfoiling, and of course there is nothing right now that proves it. Next, we should probably go on to sounds and how both of them kind of sound. Both of them actually have somewhat similar cries. In fact, thinking back to older Monster Hunter games, Kushala and Vaal actually sound extremely similar. The updated noises and updated sounds and attack noises that they've used for Kushala definitely vary him at this point, but originally Kushala and Vaal sounded very similar. It was one of the striking things that I kind of found with them. There's also an attack that's very similar that Vaal uses that Kushala had used back in, I believe it was Monster Hunter 3, maybe even Monster Hunter 2, but he would basically look down at the ground and fire off his breath attack. Who else does this? Vaal Hazak. And that actually leads me into, I guess, what the attack structures would be of these two. Vaal, of course, has lost the ability to control wind, or at least if I continue on with my theory, but he does have the ability to control effluvium. And this is something that still kind of creates and crafts in the same measure. Think about it this way. Vaal Hazak has the ability to create these effluvium pits, these effluvium areas around the battleground. But if you look at Kushala has the same ability, but he's able to create these wind tunnels. And realistically, all you're doing is kind of creating the same exact things. You're creating these zones of effect that are basically kind of detrimental to whatever the hunter may be trying to do. And especially off the top of my head, I can't think of a lot of other monsters that do this or have similarities like this. And of course, it's extremely interesting to note that both of these creatures veil themselves in the element that they're actually working with. Of course, Vaal Hazak kind of coating itself in that effluvium and using that as a weapon and a defense, and then of course Kushala coating itself in wind, pushing you back as you come in for an attack. Both of them also rely on similar attacks as you would probably expect to see of a monster like this. They use their front claws and they use their tail pretty commonly in basic attacks, along with some sweeping attacks with the head. So both fit very similarly this way, especially on ground attacks. Kushala definitely has a little bit more movement behind his front claws and he's a little bit tighter with his wings, while Vaal is a little slower and a little bit wider, kind of just suggesting some overall detriment in its muscles or something else, but definitely some degradation that's been kind of noted. We also need to really look over the movement and reaction of both of these monsters since, again, they're very similar. Both of them are actually passive unless you end up acting upon them. You can actually walk right in front of a Kushala Daora or a Vaal Hazak and they really wouldn't care. They'll look down at you, sure, they'll be interested in what you're doing, but the moment you end up hitting them or a monster hits them, that's when they actually start to be aggressive. I'm having a hard time really grasping the idea that both of them would have the same exact temperament. Does that make sense? In terms of actual movement, of course, Vaal's a little bit more, well, he's got a bit of a handicap, unfortunately, because of his wings being so notched up as they are. So he has the ability more on ground than he does in the air. He can, of course, take flight, as is seen when you end up mounting the monster, but it's very less common for him to go airborne, as if comparatively, if you look at something like Kushala Kushala favors the air. In fact, of course, that is his element, but he definitely likes to do a lot of his combat more in the air than on the ground. And when you see them actually both tear off, both Vaal Hazak and Kushala Daora actually both run about the same clip. They'll charge at you if need be, they'll rush at you with claws at the same manner, they tail swipe in the same manner. I'm just having a very hard time looking at Vaal Hazak and not thinking of a very tattered and worn Kushala Daora, one that probably had itself experimented on by the ancient civilization or otherwise. It's a very hard thing for me to pass away. Both dragons' armor and weapons look very different from each other, so I'm not able to pull much from that information. There's also that pesky underjaw that exists on Vaal that can't be easily explained away, minus the veil that might cover Vaal being something that may just attach to him, with another skeleton hanging off the veil. All I can really go by is how these elder dragons each look, act, and basically manage themselves. But again, this is totally just a theory and definitely not something at all confirmed, as I've done my hunting on information to attempt to find anything else that may link these two together. This isn't the first theory I've had like this as well, especially when we look at that equal dragon weapon we talked about at the top of the show. But as always, I'm interested to hear what you guys think. There's a lot of visual cues and references that I've felt Monster Hunter has relied on in the past, so I'm going to keep this one as headcanon until I'm otherwise told it isn't. I hope you guys enjoyed my thoughts on Vaal Hazak and its possible brother, the Kushala Daora. You know the buttons to press to let me know if you did or didn't like this, with the subscribe button down there to hear more theories on Monster Hunter, Destiny, and other games from me in the future. Until next hunt, keep your blade sharp and your senses keen. Take care.